Good morning, everybody. Loser Mets fan here. Sorry about the shadows. It's really sunny this morning here. So, I just wanted to make this video today to go over my thoughts on the offseason and my opinion on which direction this Mets team should go heading into the 2026 season. So, obviously, the number one player on everybody's mind right now is Pete Alonso. And Pete Alonso is a guy that transforms the complexion of your lineup, and that's just as the reality there. Just as was the case in 2025, whether or not the Mets were going to sign Alonso completely changes the look of your lineup. With him in there, it looks like an extremely potent offensive force. Without him in there, it looks like it falls off pretty hard after Soto. The same thing is going to be the case in 2026. But I think that David Stearns alluded to, and I think that the Mets are very likely to take a different direction, take a different approach going into 2026, and kind of live with those, at the very least on paper, deficiencies within how the lineup looks, to emphasize the run prevention and to primarily allocate funds to the pitching side of things. Now, with that being said, the player that I do think is probably the best option for the Mets to target in the offseason, I think would actually be Cody Bellinger. Because, as has been discussed at length, Bellinger provides some versatility in the fact that he can play any outfield position as well as first base. I would look at targeting Bellinger as your primary center fielder going into 2026. And by doing that, you are going to lengthen the lineup a bit relative to not acquiring any position players of note and just going forward with players that are already signed and in the organization. So you are getting some potential upside. I mean, Bellinger had a very good offensive season in 2025. Will he be able to replicate that? Who knows? But the defense should be there, the versatility should be there, and hopefully at the very least, an above average bat. By doing that, by signing a Bellinger, your lineup, I believe, is now adequate, even without Alonso, without anybody else. Because I think the initial thought process going into the season, when you look at the lineup on paper, could go, we need more. We need Alonso or we need a Schwarber. But I think that it's been seen that it's a lot easier to acquire an offensive player around the trade deadline in season than it's going to be to get some pitching. So I think what the Mets need to do going into 26 is just live with the fact that the lineup might not look particularly exciting on paper, although it could actually still, I believe, potentially produce quite well, and essentially go out and 85% of the focus in the offseason should be on pitching and pitching alone. So if that ends up being the case, now we have Bellinger, we don't get Schwarber, we don't get Alonso, we don't really get any other position players. You're looking at first base will be comprised of some combination of Clifford, Bellinger, and potentially Vientos could get some reps over there. You're looking at Jeff McNeil likely to be the primary second baseman. Obviously, Lindor's at short. You're looking at Beatty at third. Alvarez behind the dish. And an outfield of Nimmo, Bellinger, and, of course, Soto. When you look at it from a lineup construction perspective, you're now probably looking at Lindor continuing to lead off, Bellinger second, Soto third, and then you're probably going to end up with probably Nimmo cleanup again, which it's not great, but it could be worse, or Vientos, And then, I mean, hopefully, if Alvarez can continue to show what he did after he came back from the minors last year, I still believe that Alvarez could be a middle of the lineup guy. So after Soto, you're looking at some construction of Nimmo, Beatty, Vientos, and Alvarez, which in theory could still be pretty good. And then, you've got what you've got after that. And you're going to have a Tyrone Taylor or whoever it is to be your backup center fielder, and you can shuffle pieces around like that, put Bellinger at first, etc. If the situation calls for that. So yeah, I really think that's about all the Mets need to do, in my opinion. I think the lineup will be adequate. And then if things are going according to plan, you go out there and grab another top end bat or well above average bat towards the trade deadline, and focus primarily on pitching. Potentially, you're going to have to deal some of these players, whether it's a Vientos or whoever it would be. Obviously, you prefer to move players that don't really necessarily factor in. Like someone like Acuna, I don't really believe has much of a future on this team. Or guys in the minors, obviously, that aren't major league ready, I think can be moved for pitching. But I think that the majority of the money that is to be allocated in the offseason should be on the pitching side, and that would be some combination of probably getting a Framber Valdez, and I would just sign a few starting pitchers. I'm struggling to remember who else is available right now. I know Imanaga just recently became available. He could potentially be an intriguing option. There's a few, obviously. I guess Dylan Cease is out there too. I think there's a handful of guys. Zach Gallen, I think maybe is he available. I don't remember everybody who's a free agent right now off the top of the head, so I apologize for that. But I would go out and sign at least 2 quality major league starting pitchers to give you some length and to eat up some innings, and hopefully do that while pitching, above average and effectively. And obviously the bullpen is still basically non-existent, still fully in shambles. I would almost go as far as to say that it may be more important to retain or re-sign Edwin Diaz than it would be to go after Pete. That being said, it doesn't have to be Diaz, but a really solid bullpen needs to be assembled. And I think then if that ends up being the case, you're looking pretty solid. I think you're looking pretty solid at that point. If you can just be a well-rounded team, I think this team can absolutely compete and be in position to really compete and add a couple pieces to the trade deadline. On paper, the team should be above average defensively with Bellinger and then we'll go from there. But yeah, those are my kind of thoughts, my ramblings for today. I think that's what the Mets should do. I think that's what they're going to have to do. And I think if that's the direction that they choose to go in, the team can absolutely compete for a playoff spot in 26 without having to make many acquisitions on the position player side of things. So yeah, those are basically my thoughts for the day. Let me know what you guys think. See you on the next one.